specific groups. So what I'm hoping to do today is just to give an overview of what that has looked like, both kind of historically and contextually, and then also lead up to the work that we're doing at the moment that's ongoing and underway at present. So just to start with the usual disclaimer and acknowledge our funder, and just to emphasise that the views expressed are those of us, the authors, not necessarily those of the NIHR or the Department of Health and Social Care. So that's that box ticked. So yeah, I'm going to start with some very brief background for anyone that might need it, but I'm also kind of aware that if you're here, you're probably likely to be familiar with the tool and what we're going to talk about today. So I'll sort of hopefully try and get that balance right for people that are very familiar and perhaps those that are less familiar. So to briefly go back to sort of the very beginning, we know that measurement is a core government mechanism to manage accountability. We have obviously the ASCOT, which is designed to measure social care related quality of life. Again, I suspect many of you are familiar with the fact that it has 8 domains, these being personal cleanliness, comfort, food and drink, accommodation, safety, control over daily life, occupation or how you spend your time, social participation and dignity. Don't think I've left any out. It's a structured questionnaire. It produces a numeric score for which we can use for quantitative analysis. It was developed and tested with older social care users, and crucially, it was developed with those that were able to take part in the user experience surveys and interviews. So if the measurement that I mentioned in the previous slide is going to be kind of rigorous, valid, unbiased, it really needs to include the sort of the voices of those populations or individuals that can be hard to reach or seldom heard. And of course, this sort of structured format of surveys can be very challenging for people with either cognitive or intellectual disabilities, and that can, of course, lead to exclusion. There's a range of associated problems with any long-term condition, which can make it very difficult for people to take part in research. So that includes things like comprehension, so understanding the questions, understanding the response options that people have, manageability of surveys and tools, if they're too long or too structured, again, perhaps difficulty with choosing things like response options, physical and sensory barriers as well. You might need someone to sort of read out the questions for you or be a scribe for you. Potentially there's alternate formats which might be needed, such as Braille, those kinds of things. So for some people, the risk of exclusion is quite high. A recent report, in fact, on the representativeness of the adult social care survey found in particular that older social care users and those with cognitive decline face particular barriers to participation in surveys. So what that does for us really is identify a need and a requirement, I guess, for an easy reversion of the ASCOT. So I'm going to talk about the development, first of all, of, actually the first thing to say is that there was an original one which was developed, and that was developed as part of the Adult Social Care Survey, the ASCS. A couple of the problems with it was originally undertaken under quite tight time pressures. The aim really with doing that was to kind of minimize the differences with the standard ASCOT for comparison. But generally, feedback that we got from user groups suggested that a revision would be kind of beneficial. So a couple of projects that I'm going to talk about today to revise and update the ASCOT ER. So I hope that works okay in terms of discussing sort of two slightly different projects. One, the first one that you can see there was for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or ID and or autism, which was completed in 2015. That was followed by the validity study, which provided evidence through of the ASCOT ER's sort of feasibility and construct validity. I'm not going to talk about that specific study today. And then because of once we had developed that kind of the version for people with ID and or autism, we were constantly being asked for a new version, or if they could use that, for example, with older people, often with dementia, which it wasn't originally designed for, it wasn't tested with. So there was a clear need, I think, to develop another version for older people who need support, whether that's due to kind of cognitive decline, which could be age-related, impairment, dementia, and so that's the study for which there is work kind of currently ongoing, and I'll come to that. So both of these projects had or have kind of broadly similar methodologies. So this includes a co-production working group. So for the first project, this was with people with ID and or autism, and for our current work includes older people accessing social care who've been diagnosed with dementia, also carers of people who've been diagnosed with dementia. So we start with a number of meetings to review the version that we show people to begin with. So either the original version, which I will show you a bit of, or the kind of ASCOT ER for people with ID and or autism. So we have up to 3 meetings with our working group. We come away from those having agreed a number of changes to improve it, to make it more relevant for that particular group. And then we meet again to kind of showcase the changes that we made and discuss whether they've worked in the way that we wanted them to work. And then that's an iterative process. So we kind of continue to do that, say, up to 3 meetings with our working group in terms of making changes, re-reviewing, adapting, re-reviewing again, until we are sort of happy to start testing it one-to-one with people in cognitive interviews. So there are 3 separate rounds of the cognitive interview phases, which you can see there. And then between each of those, we go back to our working group to discuss the findings and the possible changes to make as a result of those findings for the next round of cognitive interviewing. And the aim, as fairly obviously for both of these, is to improve the clarity of the easy read version in order to maximise the response rates and minimise the need for support from carers or support workers. So prior to starting this process for developing the ASCOT ER for people with ID and or autism, and we started with this best practice, so fairly kind of reasonable and simple assumptions. So easy read characterized by lots of plain language, simple layout, simple format, and the use of images to illustrate key messages in the text. So I wanted to start by showing some of the original illustrations developed for the ASCS, or the Adult Social Care Survey. When we showed these to our initial working group, we had, this is just for this the food and drink domain, we did have some quite significant problems. So what you can see here, the lady with the mug, people would ask us whether or not she's in the picture. Is she looking at the food? Is she hungry? And a lot of this was kind of really coming away from the real essence of the question. So it wasn't really doing its job properly, which is obviously about the food and drink that individual is actually getting. And specifically talking about the food, this is always something that struck me. So I'll just highlight here the food that is on sort of display. I'm really not sure if I would want to be eating carrots that look like that, or chicken that look like that. You can see some other issues. The picture of the carrot obscuring the sandwiches behind it, it really didn't work for people at all. So what we did for this specific version is we worked with an organisation called Change, who are experts in developing materials for this particular group, and we revised that illustration. So I'll show you what we ended up with in terms of the revision. And again, we tested various things actually just with this revision. So where we had different foods, we tried at one point kind of removing the words, which didn't work because it just looked odd for people. So that just kind of gives you a nice example of the revisions that were made in this particular ASCOT ER version. So again, just talking about the illustrations, obviously these are really useful for enhancing understanding, especially more abstract concepts, difficult words. The colour images were replaced by black and white ones. Largely, I have to say that was probably due to sort of being able to replicate and print costs, that sort of thing, for colour pictures. We did go through lots of various iterations, of pictures, but pictures with clear relevance to people's experience seem to work best. Not too much detail, multiple level images, things like thought bubbles can be particularly confusing, especially for people with autism. I'll just show you a kind of brief example of that. So this image that you see here, which is not one that we included in the final version, but it's difficult, and I'll just highlight here. So bubbles within bubbles, it was extremely difficult for people to kind of really make out what was going on. So that was one of the ones that we amended as part of the iterations of going through the process that I outlined. Again, for the response options, so I'll show you the original ones, which looks like that. So again, these were sort of quite problematic for people when we tested these. I think you can probably see what it's trying to do. It's really trying to kind of hammer home the message of what that response option actually means. But it's almost sort of trying too hard. It's very busy. People got confused by the ticks and the crosses. Should I tick here? Should I not? And should I cross here? So again, I'll just highlight this response option, which is a kind of a neutral phase, but it's actually level 3 in terms of people's response. So that was also kind of problematic as well. So I'll show you the kind of revised version that, again, we changed with in developing, which worked a lot better, much more simple, people familiar and much more familiar with these days because of things like emojis, people using their phones and other standard surveys that you might come across for even just shops and services and facilities and that kind of thing, where you can see a touch screen and you ask to rate the performance, etc. So I think people are becoming much more used to seeing these types of things. Again, a couple of just sort of interesting things here with the sort of bottom 2 levels. The introduction of the sort of tier for the very bottom level was something that went through 1 or 2 iterations to really kind of try and differentiate level 3 and level 4. And that was something that we did using going through the cognitive interviewing process. So just to say a bit about this sort of question phrasing structure. So again, we sort of followed general guidance on sort of easy to understand plain text, use of short sentences, using bullet points. We avoided numbered lists when we tried that. It kind of created confusion with question numbers. So use of simple words, or where there were kind of perhaps more complex words, these were explained. For this particular group, the question stems were longer than in standard questionnaires. That people found that a bit more useful. And also sometimes longer answers seem to work better than the sort of simple 1 or 2 word phrases that you might find in a standard Leica. So very good, good, bad, very bad. People tended to favour kind of a little bit more detail so they could relate more easily to the particular response option that they were picking. So again, here's just an example. I won't kind of read it all out or anything, but this was the sort of original version for this particular question about dignity. And again, so you can just see here that it's just slightly longer and a little bit kind of more explained in terms of what the question is about. So again, just to show you a kind of, a whole question, as it were. So this is personal cleanliness and comfort. The original question you can see on the left, and the eventual kind of revision on the right there, just to give you a kind of general idea about how it's changed. Okay, so I want to move on and talk about our kind of more recent work in developing the ASCOT ER for older people accessing social care. Again, I flashed this up before, but just to sort of let you know, we are actually here in the kind of project cycle. I'm only going to talk about findings up to the end of our first round of cognitive testing, and then and start with sort of presenting what we had with our working group in the original meetings. So again, looking at the illustrations that we previously developed for the version that I was just talking about, So people really disliked them, actually. So people reported to us that the people in the images were too young. They're not in the situations that they could relate to, so they weren't relevant. This in turn could alienate their kind of responders. People told us that they need to be, say, kind of age related. In some images, people were working, other people. People told us older people accessing social care are not likely to be kind of in paid employment. I think we had a supermarket worker in one of the previous images. Reinforcing stereotypes, that was an interesting one. So older people, clearly, accessing support may well need support, and for example, with personal care, with washing, dressing, etc. But what was reported that actually this doesn't need to be explicitly shown in the picture. The illustration just needs to help the respondent understand what the question is about, what the subject matter is, or what the question domain is, without necessarily showing that people need help necessarily with that activity, even though some people will and do, clearly. So that image was changed, and we've got kind of an image of someone washing in a shower without the help, and that, I think that's an image you'll see later. Food and drink, so that was the image I showed you earlier. That wasn't particularly well received. People were unclear about it. Is it about health specifically, or having a balanced diet? Because there was all the different types of foods in there. It was quite busy, not big enough. People had struggled kind of to really look at and see what was on the image. So that was changed. Specifically as well for people, well, one of the things that was reported to us, of course, was older people might have some vision impairment, and so again, kind of changing the illustration to help with that was very much kind of something that was reported to us that needed to change. That, again, too much detail. That was pretty much across the board for all the questions. They also disliked the style. It was a bit kind of almost a bit too formal. So it's changed to a slightly more cartoonistic kind of style, which we'll see in a moment. The one thing that they did say that they liked was the happy and sad faces that I showed you. So again, a lot of people reported the emoji kind of style faces were fine because people were used to them, and that was something that they were kind of comfortable with. So I'll go through this. So that, again, I've shown you that one, and then that one, which the group for older people were not keen on. So that's now changed to say slightly different stylist. It's different stylistically to just a lady having a meal. And I must say at this point, to credit Birgit and her colleagues in Austria for the development of these new images. That was something that was done as part of their work. And so credit must go to them, and Birgit will talk about that in the next presentation. Okay, so just to talk about the wording, so for the easy read for older social care users, people reported kind of less need for words to be explained or terms to be defined. So things like "as I like," or "it could be better," "it is great," "it is okay," not necessarily needed in the response options that we had in the version that they were shown. In general, there was actually a move back towards the standard ASCOT questions, which isn't necessarily something that we were expecting. But so things like use of the word "adequate" was reinstated in the control question, and also accommodation. And then I think "feeling lonely" was one of the ones that was kind of reintroduced to the social participation question. Some words have changed. So the word "presentable" in the kind of personal cleanliness and comfort question was changed. People felt actually that was sort of, it was too formal. Kind of the word "presentable" represented something else. So, I think trying to get ready for the red carpet was one of the things that one of the members of the working group talked about, rather than just that everyday use, which is really what the question is about. Also, helping others was included rather than just volunteering. In terms of that was for the occupation question, how you spend your time. The working group felt formal volunteering was probably less common than helping others, like helping a neighbour, helping other family members, and that kind of thing. That would be more likely to be included in their sort of daily activities. Something else I think was adding being treated with respect was included in the dignity question. That was reported as important for people in the working group. Some word ordering changed also to better reflect more relevant concerns for older people. The safety question is a good example of that. So the bullet points that we have had in the safety question needed to be changed, with falling or getting hurt being the sort of top option, as it were. And that was the case for both inside the house and outside the home, because that much better reflected the concerns that they had. So, okay, so this is the cognitive testing. I can only talk about the round 1 that we've had, because we're currently in round 2. So currently we've done 6 interviews in Kent, Hampshire, Sussex and London. People were at the higher end of cognitive impairment as measured by our mini-cog tool. That was a little surprising. I mean, in some cases, probably, I think we were looking at people that you might more expect to find in care homes, so care home residents. And, we can sort of speculate a little bit as to potential reasons for that, whether it's kind of policy drivers or things like impact of COVID. So again, you've got sort of characteristics of the people that we've interviewed so far. Some things to work on here, particularly in sort of ethnic diversity, less self-funders and more people funded by the local authority. And again, let's say participants probably more on the more mild to moderate end of cognitive impairment, what we want to try and recruit going forward. Just to highlight one of the changes that we've made as a result of that round 1, really easy kind of slight change for the question ordering. People in some cases were conflating the sort of social participation and occupation, so that's moved. I'll show you how that's gone up, because people would, when having talked about kind of social participation and then moved on to talk about occupation or how they spend their time, were potentially just focusing on social time rather than kind of more daily activities. Okay, so another thing that was moving the tick boxes and the response props. So you can have a look at the control question here for the kind of the version that we had to start with. You can see that the tick boxes, kind of emoji style faces at the end here. We had some difficulty and issues with read across and ticking the boxes for some individuals. And so that's now changed to perhaps a kind of more standard. And it's actually in line with the current adult social care survey. So they've moved to there, and these faces have moved a little closer for this particular example. I'm aware I'm running out of time, so this is my last slide. Just to outline some of our next steps, which is to complete the round 2 of cognitive interviews. We've got 10 interviews currently being carried out. We've got our 5th working group meeting in June, so we'll take back our findings to that group and again discuss some potential changes, some of the issues that we've had. We'll go out again for round 3 of cognitive testing, and then we'll come back and the final version will be agreed with the working group. And just to mention a couple of other outputs that will be included, that's a 1-page lay summary of the project, and that's going to be developed with the working group. And not just that, potentially also their experience of being part of the co-production team and working with us as researchers. And then also some testimonial videos from those, again, who have been part of our working group in terms of the co-production and also the tool that eventually gets developed. So that's me done, I think. And I will stop there, stop sharing my screen.
Second up, we'd like to welcome Dr. Birgit Turkischitz and Dr. Asma Haji from the University of Vienna. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sharing our screen now. Yep. Okay. Does it work?
Yes, that's fine.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, good. So hello everyone. This is a presentation about the making of the read version of the German ASCOT. In sort of developing this version, we applied a different set of methods, eye tracking, cognitive interviews, but also focus groups, and we would share our experiences with this. I'm Birgit Ruckeschitz, and next to me is Asma Haji. Before we go into details, I would like to thank our collaborations partners. Without those people, we would not have been possible to do this research. They provided access to our participants. They provided us with devices we used for the testing, and also thanks to the ASCOT group at the University of Kent. Of course, thanks to all the participants of the study. So they gave us a lot of insights into what we can do and what we should not do. And also a big thank you to Doris. Doris is part of the ASCOT team at the WU Vienna, and she supported us a lot when adapting the German ASCOT instruments and when collecting the data and doing the interpretation. And all of this would not have been possible without funds, of course, and so it's also the acknowledgement of the funder of the study. Thanks to James, we have heard now a lot about the ASCOT and what it does. So what we did, we were lucky to build on the ASCOT, on the German version of ASCOT. So what we already had when starting the adaptation to the Easy Read language is we had instruments for service users and informal carers, and for service users, the interview version, as well as the self-completion tool, and for the carers, the whole set of instruments. And they are available for people interested in, so they can reach us on our website. So why doing the Easy Read version? Basically, the big chance that ASCOT provides is to learn more about people's long-term care related quality of life, or social care related quality of life, and to allow people as long as possible to have their say, right? And instead of relying on proxy answers, or people responding on care-dependent people's behalf, it would be better to make ASCOT more accessible. Basically, we had a lot of experience with ASCOT, so we did about 600 interviews with service users and 300 interviews with carers in Austria, and it worked quite well. But we also learned about sort of what we can do better. And our aim was to provide an easy read version for people with mild cognitive impairment, so not really people with severe dementia, but only mild cognitive impairment, people who have difficulties understanding long sentences and complex topics. So long sentences is quite typical for the German language. So this is sort of a language issue we have. And of course, problems reading text, being in a layout that is not really suitable for this group.
Okay, so after this introduction, sorry about that. That was a bit fast. I'll walk you through the Easy Read adaptation process that we followed in Austria. So basically, our starting point was the German ASCOT service user questionnaire that we already had, as Birgit just mentioned. And we also had the Easy Read version for people with learning disabilities that we just heard about in the previous presentation. And then what we did was we did a first adaptation, and we collaborated with an illustrator to get a first draft, including first illustrations. We then did an internal revision within the team to get like a preliminary version of the ASCOT Easy Read in German. That's abbreviated to ASCOT LL for leicht lesen. We then did cognitive interviews and eye tracking with people living in care homes and receiving home care services. Actually, we did several rounds of that. We did revisions in between as well. And we also had an Easy Read checking group to make sure that everything was in accordance with Easy Read guidelines to get to our final version. How did we start out? How did we create first draft? We did a language adaptation, and we used general literature on Easy Read guidelines. and also specific easy read guidelines and resources for German text. And as Birgit said before, the target language level was A2. And we did the adaptation also based on previous work we just heard about. And to do the first version, what we did was we set up this easy read adaptation spreadsheet to kind of guide us through the process so we don't leave out anything or forget anything. And we carried out the adaptations individually. So they keep disappearing. Sorry, I need to come closer. By 3 researchers, and then we combined those results and discussed in the team. And as previously mentioned, we have specifically created illustrations for this easy read version of ASCOT, and those were revised quite a few times as well during the process. To give you an idea of this spreadsheet that we use, so this is an excerpt from it. Basically what we did was we broke text down into individual units of analysis, and then we followed a set of rules that we cycled through for each of the units of analysis. So this would be an example. We have 1 unit of analysis here. The next column just lists potential issues grouped by areas. So areas would be text, layout, formatting, grammar, and so on. So we went through these issues one by one and checked whether they were present or not. And this is just to gray out everything that's not relevant. Then we have a list of suggested solutions for each of these issues. We drew that from the literature. Then we revised the text according to these solutions. And then there was a column to just check whether the issue was solved or not. In cases where the issues couldn't be solved, we discussed that in the group. And we did that for all units of analysis, and we did that twice just to make sure that the revised text was also in accordance with easy read guidelines.
So this was the process, how we developed the wording. Part of the easy read versions are also illustrations, and basically we were very lucky to have someone at hand who is not only a skillful designer, but is also a former care home manager. So she knew a lot about the settings, about the fields, about the people there. We didn't show her the illustrations from England because we wanted her to develop everything right from scratch in her own way. And the idea she came up with was to convey the mood, the emotions that come with the ASCOT domains. And at the beginning, we had, for example, for the ASCOT occupation thing, we had black and white illustrations, and later on colorized versions. And I think this is a good example to give you then, because people like to do different things. So some would like to play cards, some would like to go out, whatever. And the idea is to convey the emotions that come with this. This was about the development process, and now we started testing with the typical approach, basically with cognitive interviews. So we went into the care home, and our aim was to assess basically how did people perceive the questionnaire. Could the questions and instructions be understood? What about the response options? We had some participants that helped us to find this out. And the main results were, in terms of text and layout, clear structure is essential. And it doesn't matter whether this is repetitiveness or not. People like to have this in order to know what's going on, what we would like to ask them. Lists can turn out to be quite confusing, so we should be very careful with lists of examples, for example. And we should also avoid ambiguous terms, like having enough to do, or a very abstract thing like social life. And in terms of illustrations, they should be simple, no fine lines or distracting details. They should be friendly. This is what people really appreciated, and they should be relevant. And for relevant, I would like to give you an example for the self-care domain. So we first had this one, so a person in a bathtub, and but people said, well, you know, I do not use this anymore. And other people, well, they did not see just one person, they saw two persons in it. And this is something we didn't want to convey for this picture. So we changed it and we used the shower picture for feeling clean and comfortable. So these were sort of the results from the cognitive interviews. And we used another technique to gain more information about the developed easy read versions.
Yes, and the second technique we used was eye tracking, and the aims of the eye tracking exercise were to gain insight into the completion process of respondents, into their reading patterns, also into the amount of time spent on images versus the amount of time spent on text, because we really had no idea whether people would be focusing on the images, maybe too much, maybe too little, we didn't know. And also to get a general idea of how feasible it is to use eye tracking equipment. We used eye tracking glasses, as you can see in the picture, with older participants, because we know they have a lot of eyesight issues potentially. So we thought there might be some difficulties with that. We did the study with 11 participants. Those were all care home residents. And the way we did it was we had one researcher sitting with the person who was reading the questionnaire, filling out the questionnaire, and another person tracking the respondents' eye movements in real time on a tablet computer. And after the exercise, we did kind of a short cognitive interview. So we did follow up with some probes and so on. And the results of the eye tracking questionnaire was respondents spent surprisingly little time looking at the images. Interestingly enough, they did, however, notice the images. So when asked about them afterwards, they were able to remember the images and to say what they thought about them, and mostly they liked them. So in a way, we assumed that the images really helped to set the mood, but they didn't draw away the focus from the text. We also saw in the reading patterns and completion patterns that the repetitiveness of the structure really helped. So what I mean by that is we have these building blocks that kind of come up in every domain. And after completing one or two domains, respondents really had it figured out. Like they didn't need to go back to the explanation or back up an answer, because they knew how the questionnaire worked, and that was fairly easy to see actually. We did, however, notice there were quite a few issues with the feasibility, and I said we had 11 respondents completing the exercise. I think we only had somewhat useful data from 6 or 7 of them. There were issues with eyesight correction. Obviously, we knew people were going to have eyesight issues, and we tried to control for that. We had different methods of doing that, but there were still some problems with it. We also had issues with respondents having had eye surgeries. We tried to exclude respondents who had previously had eye surgeries, but especially because LASIK has become so common, that was really hard to do. And we also had issues because we used glasses, eye tracking glasses that people wore instead of or over their regular glasses, with head movements and questionnaire placement when people moved around the questionnaire in front of them. So that made the data very noisy. Yes, those are the main eye tracking results.
Yeah, so and finally we asked a group of people to check the easy read final version for us.
Yes, so we had an ER checking group, and that was mainly to make sure that the text was adhering to easy read guidelines, because by that point we already knew that it was fairly easy to understand. Like, we didn't have any major issues anymore, but we wanted to systematically check the text and the illustrations. And for that, we used an easy read checking group that consisted of 5 participants and 1 group moderator. And overall, they reported back that the understanding was good, that pretty much everything was in line with easy read guidelines. We got some positive feedback on the illustrations as well. There were some minor formatting changes that they suggested, and we changed those things as well, like line breaks at certain parts, and some minor changes in wording that we did as well.
Yeah, and at the end, we sort of fulfilled all the requirements so that we can use the European easy-to-read logo provided by Inclusion Europe for the questionnaires. Right, so how do the instruments now look like? So this was the original version in German, so don't worry about if you cannot follow the text, that's not really important at the moment. So we just would like to show you the blocks that Asma mentioned before. So there's the question, then an explanation, and you see it's across 3 lines or 2.5 lines, so it's quite a lot. Then the instruction, so please tick the box that fits best to you, and the answering options. And for the easy read version, now we have the new illustration, then the domain name. So this is also different to the original version. So we include the domain name. We have an explanation that is very short. Then we have also a new header that points to the question, so make people aware now there is the question. Then we have the question in the easy read format, also the instruction, which in German doesn't make much difference, and also the easy read answering response options. And at that time, we picked up the idea from the English colleagues to have 2 sentences, 1 sentence is explaining the situation and the other sentence saying, okay, whether this is good for me or not, in order to make an additional emphasis to distinguish the 4 domains. Yeah, so the ASCOT version in easy read language is available on our website and can be used for all people who are happy to fill in the application form for us. Okay, good. Thank you very much.